Hello and welcome to the Irish NFL Show. My name is Shane Brennan and thank you very much for joining us as we continue our division by division previews ahead of the 2025 NFL season, which is coming just around our corner. Our preview tonight of the AFC South comes with you thanks to QuinnBet. But first, before we get on to that, I'd just like to give a shout out to anybody to go onto our social media profiles where you could win a yearly subscription to NFL Game Pass. Just look on our Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook for details as to how to enter the competition. You'll be able to watch all of the NFL action on the Game Pass. Is a fantastic thing to have. Delighted to be joined tonight by Brian O'Leary, Kieran Boyle, and Kieran O'Donovan as we take a look at a division which has often been described as winnable, which generally is code for there's a lot of mediocre teams here, which sometimes makes it fun. But we have to start with the reigning champions when it comes to the division, which of course are the Houston Texans, Brian. And so much of the conversation last year is almost that the Texans sort of cruised into winning their division, but they were still 10-7. They managed to get into the playoffs where they got a victory. But the big question mark is going to be over CJ Stroud, because I think the phrase sophomore slump was used over him last year, which is more of a compliment to his great talents and how fantastic he did in his rookie year, exceeding all expectations that we had of him. But now he's in his third year. People are going to really start looking for him to sort of take leadership of this group.
Yeah, it was a bit of an unusual year really for them because they kind of, I wouldn't say they eased to the playoffs, but the division wasn't at the level in which it was last year. He did have a downward slump in terms of the expectation going into the last season. I recall this time last year, maybe Kieran Boyle might be guilty of Texans love. I think he had them going to the playoffs, or certainly to the Super Bowl, certainly to the playoffs, maybe even the Super Bowl. But it didn't transpire that way, and yet they go to the playoffs. They beat the Chargers, and I mean they gave the Chiefs everything they needed in that with their divisional round game. CJ Stroud, for me, I think ultimately this season will come down to, and I think this is very much the same nature as last year. Their offensive line last year didn't play at the same level in which it did the previous year, which allowed him to flourish in his fourth year. I think they made a mistake in trading Tunsil. I think Washington might be on the right side of that. I think that's a move. Bearing in mind what they did over the course of the last 3 or 4 years with him to try and make sure he was like a stellar player, the moves they made to get him, and then to trade him away. You look at what they've done in free agency. They brought in a lot of offensive line. It's an offensive line heavy division. If you look at the teams across the board, they've all seemed to have really done a lot of homework and a lot of signings around the offensive line. I think ultimately this team will go as far as they can, depending on CJ Stroud, but ultimately I think that depends on the offensive line. Defensively, in their own right, they're very strong. Stingley got the contract in the offseason. He's a standout player. They got players up front that can do damage. But for me, ultimately, it'll come down to how well this offensive line will play. But they're going to have to improve on last season. I think this division will be competitive. I expect a huge upward turn from the Jags form of last year. I think the Jags are really going to challenge to bounce back and win the division. So the Texans are going to have to be on it, and they're going to have to be on it early in the season.
Yeah, Kieran Boyle, it's an interesting point that Brian raised there, because I think as much as we talk about CJ Stroud and the sophomore slump, really what let him down is the fact that there's a lot of wide receiver injuries around him, and the offensive line just was not good enough in protecting him. I keep going back to the game around Christmas when the Chiefs just had CJ Stroud running for his life almost in a panicky mood. And how much could you really expect from your quarterback and your offense then? I mean, the Texans ended last year as being the 17th best offense in the league based on a few different metrics, but the 7th best defense. So the defense is definitely the strength of that team. But if you're not winning in the trenches, how far can you really expect to go in the league, especially when you are a team who have enough talent there to really make a playoff push?
Yeah, and that was a big problem from last year, as well as the issue at wideout. I mean, they lost Tank Dell, and we know what happened with Diggs. And, I like what they did in the draft. They picked up the 2 Iowa State kids, Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, 2 nice additions because they had to address that. That was a smart move on their part. And, like Brian said, they picked up a couple of O-linemen, and they did get somebody in the draft, Aronte Ursary, I think I pronounced that correct, tackle. He's a good player, and he's probably going to start the way things are going for them right now. But, yeah, I mean, it's all there for the Texans. I know I spoke maybe about a month or 2 ago about the Jags and how I was high on them, and I am pretty high on them. But between things I've heard out of Jacksonville the last week or so, and then, just from listening to some Texans reports and then just really scanning that roster, that defense is still absolutely monstrous. I mean, you still have, like Brian said, Stingley's in there, Danielle Hunter, To'o, CJ Gardner-Johnson they got from Philly. It's just reloaded, and in a division that usually there's a lot of attrition in this division. Teams taking points and games off each other all the time. I mean, this is one of those divisions I see is kind of like you have the two front runners and then the two also rans, but we'll get to them in a little bit. But Texans and the Jags will be up there. They'll be 1 and 2 or 1A and 1B. But I like the moves that they've made. And again, Stroud, we know the issues he had. It was the O-line. It was losing his weapons. Joe Mixon, and there's only so much Joe Mixon and Nico Collins can do before they get, or especially Nico Collins before he gets, triple teamed, let alone double teamed. So they did what they could. They got as far as they could. They kind of stuttered towards the finish line, and they barely, they squeezed every ounce they could out of that offense. The offensive line for me is still a question. It's not one of the stronger ones in the league. Dalton Schultz is out there too. He might have to be a sixth blocker a lot of the times. But it's a big year for Stroud. Tank Dell doesn't look like he's playing at all for this year. Is the O-line up to it? New OC, Stroud has got to take less sacks. That's the thing. I think he took 40 sacks last year or something like that. So the O-line's got to help him out. They've helped him out with some of the offensive weapons, but that'll be the question. But I do see the Texans doing really good this year. Probably similar in record to last year, 10-7. But again, this division is super tight, and it's going to give me a game in between the winner and the runner-up in this division.
Shane, Shane, just one quick point before you go on. Nick Chubb has been signed obviously he's been released by the Browns and they picked him up, and there's a few teams that looked at him, and obviously there's a big risk factor in the fact that he's coming off this serious injury. If he gets back playing at the level in which we saw in Cleveland, if he can recover from this injury, he's a huge attribute to have. I know they have Joe Mixon and Kieran's alluded to him there, but he has his own injury concerns over the course of the last year, and I think even now he's had a few difficulties, in terms of going into camp. If they can get him back even at a reasonably good level, that will take the pressure off Stroud. And another sneaky one, I think, is Christian Cork. And I know he really didn't deliver in Jacksonville, but sometimes a player that kind of gets traded within the division has a point to prove, and he could be a little player. Bear in mind where they are with the wide receivers. They are two players that could end up being key players over the course of the season.
Yeah, it's interesting. You look at Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb, both of whom are questionable. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Christian Kirk. There's a lot of talent in there. But at the same time, Kieran O'Donovan, I think defense is still going to have to find a way to make a stand. It's interesting looking at the fact that pass defense has always been a strength of theirs. They're quite good at getting to the quarterback there. They've got really strong cornerbacks. They've added Jalen Smith from USC in the draft as well. You can have a lot of confidence there, but again, it's about making sure that the scheme is right, that who you're facing against is right, and you keep the pressure on, because any sense of staying still in this league means you're moving backwards. But I think there's a lot of reasons to be confident in that section of the Houston Texans game.
Yeah, and they brought in CJ Gardner-Johnson at safety as well. He's hurt at the moment. I think he's dealing with a knee issue. So now they've gone out and brought in Jalen Mills at safety as well. So they're they're padding the numbers just to give themselves that bit of an insurance. But it all comes down, I think, to D'Amico Ryans. I think I spoke about him last year, and his body language and the energy that they fed off up and down the sideline when they were on the crest of a wave later on in the season when things started rolling for them. And he looks like one of these guys, a la Salah. For the 49ers when he was the DC, one of these guys that you'd run through a wall for. And I think there isn't too many questions about this defense. And look, I'm only echoing what the lad said. Anything you listen to, anything you look at online at the moment, it just comes down to the offensive line and can they make enough strides in the off season, because I think the defense is going to be on point. And you brought up Nick Chubb, Brian, and Joe Mixon last year. I had him in and out of my fantasy football team. I'm sure I had him at the wrong times, but he did prove like he can be a touchdown machine. And then you're only going to increase that impact when you have a 1-2 punch with Nick Chubb as well in the backfield. And it's very funny, like with all the talk about CJ Stroud having a down year and a sophomore slump, whatever you want to call it, they still went out, won the division and won a playoff game and were competitive in the next playoff game as well. So I think on the basis of this so-called down year, they might be underestimated this year, funnily enough, even though CJ Stroud was kind of touted as a wonderkind after year one. But no, like the over-under is 9.5 wins. I can't see them going under that. I think they'll win, as you guys are saying, a minimum of 10 wins. I think, as you said, even though the Jags can expect to be more competitive, I think you'll see another push from a bit of a jump from the Titans. But no, I think they should win this division, and potentially do it comfortably as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We're talking so much about the quarterback and the team. I think in 2023, CJ Stroud had 5 interceptions and was sacked 38 times. Last year, he was intercepted 12 times and was sacked 52 times. So that's, I guess, the nature of the squad around him, and I guess that's something he'll be looking forward to changing.